Welcome to the Mueller Report graphic novel panel with Shannon Wheeler and Steve Duin. And we're here to talk about the Mueller Report and its significance and how we took it and turned it into a graphic novel. First, I'm going to let Steve introduce himself, and then I'll introduce myself properly. Go ahead, Steve.
Shannon, we've been working on this for quite a while, so it's always good to get together with you again. My name is Steve Duin. I'm a longtime columnist for the Oregonian in Portland, but I've done quite a few other things too. Probably one of the things I'm proudest of is author of Comics Between the Panels, History of the Medium that Dark Horse published in 1998. Have also have a collection of my columns, Father Time, have written a novel about hardcore parents and middle school kids in sports programs, The Less We Touch. And Shannon and I have worked together, as you're about to see, on a previous graphic novel called Oil and Water, published by Fantagraphics, which is about the economic and environmental devastation wrought on Louisiana and the Gulf Coast by the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon.
And I'll take this moment to say I'm Shannon Wheeler, and I started in comics doing underground work called Too Much Coffee Man. And I self-published this for years until Dark Horse started doing the graphic novels for me. This is about, I don't know, 15, 20 years of my life. About 10 years ago, I started doing single panel cartoons for the New Yorker, and they're gag panels. Steve and I worked on the Oil and Water graphic novel together. I moved on to doing, when Trump became president, I was working on another collection of single panel cartoons, but instead I took Trump's tweets and illustrated them. I've gone on to illustrate a number of his deleted tweets. This one, starting with Prince of Wales, that he misspelled and then deleted. So I draw him on the Prince of Wales. I took the whistleblower papers and turned that into a zine, which, using the same techniques and formatting as Steve and I used in the Mueller Report. And that brings us pretty much up to date on the garbage that I do. The question that I have for Steve, as you know, we move into a faster and faster news cycle, the Mueller Report feels like 100 years ago. At the time, the impeachment of Trump and all that stuff was just overwhelming. But now we're dealing with COVID, and even without COVID, just every week there's a new set of things that are happening. So I'd ask Steve, like, why is the Mueller Report significant? Why should we read it? Why should we try to understand it? Why should we read the graphic novel?
You know, Shannon, first I want to, it's a rock after all of this time. I really believe that. The Mueller Report is a bedrock document in terms of how we understand the Trump presidency and Russian interference in the 2016 election. You know, Mueller spent, and his investigators spent 2 years working on this, and the genius of it, I think, is that they were so cautious and determined that this not be a partisan document. You know, they didn't leak. There were no leaks out of that office. They weren't talking to Tucker Carlson or Rachel Maddow, trying to sort of set the stage for what they were about to produce. They didn't really respond when the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, totally mischaracterized the conclusions that they reached. They investigated with, you know, I don't mean to overstate it, but with an incredible amount of dignity and discipline. And in these times, Shannon, there's not a lot of dignity and discipline in politics. So as I said, I mean, I think the more time we've spent in the Mueller report, the more impressed both of us, I think, have been with what he achieved here.
Yeah, his discipline was incredible. And I was, the thing that my takeaway a little bit is showing, like, he revealed patterns that seem to be repeated over and over again. Even in yesterday's news, Trump is the stuff that he did with the Ukraine, where he's intimidating them to influence the election. The notes in the Bolton book are coming out saying that that's what he did with the China meeting, saying he's wanting that to influence the election. So it's a very self-serving. So to see the patterns, the Mueller book shows all these patterns, and to just see them repeated and to learn what those patterns are, I think are really important and significant.
Yeah, and I can hear an audience in the background cheering, Shannon, your work on this. The other thing, Shannon, that I think clearly of late, I mean, when the Mueller report first came out, no one tried to challenge it. I mean, in the impeachment hearings, when senators from either side, or House members from either side, I guess, were questioning folks about Trump, no one was challenging the conclusions of the Mueller report. But of late, there's been an extraordinary assault on it, and it's on its conclusions. I mean, the unbelievable thing we're going through right now with Michael Flynn, where Michael Flynn, the national security advisor for the United States, freely admits that he lied to everyone basically in sight about, the conclusion. He was basically negotiating with the Russian ambassador to basically let the Russians know they could sort of mellow out on the sanctions that President Obama, while still president, put on Russia because of its interference, its cyber tricks with the election. And Flynn freely admits that he lied to just about everyone, including the vice president, the eventual vice president, Mike Pence, about that. But suddenly, 3 years later, Flynn is trying to argue that, and his attorney is trying to argue, those lies were not particularly significant. There was an FBI sting operation, which would excuse them. And again, it's an assault on sort of our understanding of the way government works that I think Mueller clearly got his arms around in this book. And suddenly we're seeing the Trump administration doesn't want us to believe anything and the conclusions that Mueller came to.
So, okay, so 2 points. That makes me think of two things. One, Trump's tweets and his spin on it. Well, actually, I'll start with the first thing, with the spin. So there's basically like a rewriting of history that I find personally offensive, where there is the Mueller report, and like you said, it's unassaulted, unquestioned, or it's verified, and it's not in and of itself, and yet they're still spinning it, and Trump administration, Barr and Trump, are trying to make it into something that it isn't. And so going back to the original document and trying to represent it accurately and saying, this is important to understand so that we're not looking at spin or a rewriting of history. But the second thing is, you hit on the Russia thing. So Russia, like that's another spin, but tell me the Mueller report, like what is the relationship with Russia in short? Like, and when Trump's saying there was no relationship with Russia, is what Trump's saying accurate in any way?
From the very beginning, Shannon, Trump what's the word I'm looking for? The way he tried to frame the Mueller report was a debate on collusion. Was there collusion between the Trump administration and the Russians to affect the 2016 election? I don't think collusion is a word that appears anywhere in the Mueller report. Mueller is never arguing that. And I think that was one of the things that surprised both of us as we sort of waded into this, is to realize what Trump was trying to figure out, excuse me, what Mueller was trying to figure out was there some really weird stuff was happening, some really sort of weird connections between the Russians and the Trump administration. Was there a conspiracy? In other words, when suddenly WikiLeaks, as soon as the Hollywood Access tape comes out, and Trump is arguing, we know what Trump was arguing. This was you can grab them exactly where you want to grab them, and it doesn't really seem to matter. The moment that came out, WikiLeaks dumped an unbelievable thousands of emails that they had basically stolen from the computer of the head of the Democratic National Committee, John Podesta. And so it's just sort of, Mueller is examining this. This is odd. How is the timing of this works? I mean, how are the Russians involved in this? How, or were the Russians simply trying to do everything they could to get Trump in office only because they thought for Russian goals, Trump would be a better alternative for them than Hillary Clinton? So, I mean, and Shannon, as you're drawing this, I mean, how subtle were some of the things that we had to wrestle with, given, again, as I said, the discipline with which Mueller approached all of this?
Yeah, some of it is how much editorializing are we going to do? And that was in the drawings, how much do I want to vilify Trump? How much do I, and there's a little bit of an artistic leap where I'm representing Russian interest as a Russian bear, which is corny and not really their icon anymore. But so yeah, I was surprised as well about the collusion is not something that he was looking to prove. It really was, what are the levels of communication and the conspiracy? So, and that's something that the graphic novel, I think that allowed us to do really well, because we could tie and explain what Mueller was talking about visually. So we could say, here are the connections between these 6 people, and really draw the characters and draw the lines between Flynn and Russia and Trump, basically. And visually you see these connections.
Well, and as you know, Shannon, too, Mueller eventually concludes that they cannot prove a conspiracy here. And again, so he does unbelievable diligence in terms of addressing all of this. And yeah, there's weird stuff going on, but there is no conspiracy with the Russians that he can prove. Obstruction.
Part of it though, there is the word conspiracy. It has these layers of meaning, and one of the things that Mueller, he's approaching it legally. And so what is the difference between conspiracy and how we think of it in normal usage, and the definition that Mueller's applying to it?
Well, I think he's applying the exact, again, the control and discipline he should. That, how coordinated was the campaign between the Russians and the Trump administration? And no, it wasn't coordinated. They were, certainly the Russians were trying to serve Trump's end, but they weren't calling, they're not calling Steve Bannon. They're not calling Paul Manafort to arrange any of this. There's an unbelievable amount of white noise where they're sending out, the bots are sending out tweets. They're doing all sorts of things to try to get Trump elected, but they're not coordinating that with the Trump campaign. And I don't think, again, Shannon, does Trump even believe that he's going to be elected? Does he even hold out that possibility anyway? Or is it simply an exercise to, increase his brand recognition?
Yeah, I tend to think that he did not expect to be elected. I don't think they expected to pull it off. And That's one reason why I don't think they had a whole lot of plans for post-election plans. And to me, the Russians weren't really they were trying to influence the election, but they weren't expecting to win it. And they were looking to sow dissent and conflict is how I saw it. Is that what you would think, or what's your take?
Well, Shannon, the worst 15 minutes of my life, I think, were when I was on camera on election night and the news came in that Trump had won. And it wasn't that well, of course I was disappointed, but I was in disbelief. I didn't know what to say. And suddenly the camera is on you and you're, well, and Trump, I think, was equally unprepared. Trump, and in desperate, Trump didn't know to whom to turn to get help. He hires Paul Manafort, a total sellout douchebag, basically, for the Ukraine, because Manafort agrees to work for free. He's advised by both Chris Christie and Barack Obama, you don't want to go anywhere near Mike Flynn, but he hires him as national security advisor. He did not know where to go for expertise. And once things start going out of control and he realizes he's being investigated, because that, as you know, Shannon, in the beginning, all Trump cares about, again, he wasn't coordinating this with the Russians. His sons weren't either. All Trump cares about is, as always, himself. Am I being personally investigated? Right. And once he realizes that he is, once James Comey shows up and won't, testifies before Congress, James Comey being, again, the head of the FBI, and won't, basically give, Trump the, the e-ticket, the free pass, whatever, Trump loses it. And that's when, again, the case for obstruction begins to come together in the Mueller report, because of all the things that Trump did to keep us from understanding what was really going on here.
And that's the old trope of it's not the crime, but the cover-up that you end up being guilty of.
And Shannon, as you look at what, again, you're drawing this. We're both, you and I spent a year on this. And one of the years we spent a year on this is because Mueller spent 2 years. It was incredibly complicated, and trying to, of all the things that Trump did, other than screaming fake news, what did you find, I don't know, disbelief, shock, admiration? Where did you, in terms of what do you marvel the most at in terms of Trump's obstructive acts?
They're obstructive acts, but the thing that fascinates me the most is the questions where Mueller said, okay, here are, I have these questions, and it took a lot of negotiating to get the questions to Trump. So eventually he gets the written questions. And then Trump goes through and answers these questions about the investigation. Like, did you have knowledge of this? Did you coordinate this? Did this person who did this thing talk to you about this? And almost to a T down the line, Trump says, I have no recollection of this. I did not know about this. I may have been there at this time, and but that's only, I learned that by looking at my calendar, because otherwise I wouldn't know about it. So his language was lawyer-ese, where it created an ambiguity in the answers that is indisputable. To him say he doesn't remember, you can't argue whether or not he remembers it. And then for him to do that and evade these questions with such shamelessness, then to turn around and say, I answered the questions myself, which he clearly did not do. They're all written in lawyer speak. And I answered them fully, and it was no problem. And it's 3 lies straight in a row, and they're clearly lies. And if I were a parent, I would send that kid to his room, to a therapist. Like, there's something wrong in that. And that audacity is what, to me, it's just a disgusting audacity of lying like that just bothers me at my core.
Well, and that you can still be outraged by that, Shannon. I'm impressed because, you know, for how many years now have we been dealing with the, you know, reflexive lying by the President of the United States? But give Mueller credit. I mean, you know, you are wrestling with every panel you draw of how snarky you want to be in
Yep.
dealing with Trump. And Mueller doesn't approach this that way, which again is one of the reasons I think we both believe this is such an important document to read. I mean, Mueller is reconstructing what happened, and at a time, by the way, when just about everyone is lying to him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cohen is lying to him and his investigators. Michael Cohen being the personal counsel to the president. Papadopoulos is lying to him. Manafort is lying to him. Flynn is lying to him. So in other words, there is no one, with scant exception. You know, one of my favorite characters in the book is Annie Donaldson's notepad. Now, Annie Donaldson is the assistant to counsel Don McGahn, who's the White House counsel. And by the way, that means that he works for the White House and the United States, not that he works for Donald Trump, the president. I learned that watching West Wing, by the way. But Annie Donaldson is in a notepad taking contemporaneous notes about what's going on. And it's this, they're so cool because they're so honest. And there's no one wants to be honest in this. They follow Trump's lead in that they are shameless, most of them, and that shamelessness has never caught up to them somehow. Well, with the Mueller report, it did. By lying to Mueller or lying to Congress, most of these guys are going to jail. Maybe not for very long. You know, Paul Manafort was in jail for, I think, 12 days. But this is, I think, what Mueller was particularly successful at doing is looking under every rock to reconstruct what really happened as Trump tries to fight off the clear conclusion that if he didn't coordinate all of this stuff with the election, he tried everything he could do to stop Mueller from investigating it.
Yeah, and Mueller kept his cool, and I would have been enraged. And that is a little bit one of the techniques that they use is get your adversary, the person that you're on the playing field with, play their emotions, and I get played. You know, I'm sitting in front of a drawing table, so I cool off. But if I were Mueller, I would have started giving interviews saying, hey, Trump is not answering these questions. And I would have used the public, I would have tried to manipulate the public to get him to answer the questions honestly. And instead, Mueller is even and neutral and fair in a way that is remarkable. And much respect to him for that discipline that he has.
And Shannon, let me add, somewhat tedious. I mean, this sucker goes on for 28 pages. Look at this. Mm-hmm. Shannon, can you hold up our graphic novel, by the way? Do you got that handy?
Yeah. So this is, yeah. Yeah, so this is, you know, the work that we put into it. And then the cover, which I drew it a few times. So I'm not sure which of these is the one that we ended up using. But on one of them, they're all pretty much the same. So the idea is that Trump was being chased by Mueller, and the magnifying glass is that he was looking closely at the activities, and the idea that he's revealing, hey, here are the things underneath the clothing. And that's what he did. And he did it like a doctor, where there wasn't a lot of judgment on it. And if Trump chose not to answer the questions, Mueller didn't freak out over it. He puts this forward as a document, and partly, I think the significance of it and the faith that Mueller had in it is that it wasn't his job to convict. It was his job to use the magnifying glass to expose. And it really is a democracy where the responsibility of pursuing criminal activity and he's laying out the roadmap, and we're the ones that are supposed to follow it. It's not his job to follow that road.
And yes, I think that's a really important point, Shannon. And Mueller's job, and Mueller has said almost nothing about the report. His argument was the report speaks for itself. Our job, our responsibility was to read it and act on it. And I think that's where you and I kind of came in, because as I said, the report goes on and on. You can get lost in it on a number of occasions, and you can look for the sanctuary of a totally absurd conclusion about what it says from the Attorney General of the United States. So which was basically, there's nothing here, folks. There's nothing you need to be all that concerned about. So our job, I think, Shannon, was to help people understand, put this in a form, the graphic novel, a graphic narrative, to make this a little bit easier to, bounce from one highlight to the other. And I guess one of the things I think I'd ask you, Shannon, is what is it about the comic medium? What were we able to do with the comic medium that Mueller wasn't able to do with the sort of unbelievable formal legal approach that he took to this?
Well, part of that's just your writing, where you were taking a piece here and a piece there and tying them together and saying, okay, here's this bit with Flynn, and then here's Flynn again, and here's Flynn a third time, and let's string these together. And then graphically to say, let's connect these three images and give them an image so that we're operating on both a visual memory as well. Because you hear words like Kislyak or Yanovich, or these names, for me, meld. But when you start to put a visual along with it, then it becomes a tapestry that you start to make sense of, and you start to see the patterns. That's how I was looking at it.
Talk for a moment, Shannon, about the rogue cards.
Well, that's we pulled. I didn't bring that my Dick Tracy reference, Fearless Fosstick, which is a Dick Tracy parody in a lot of ways better. I was using a lot of the Dick Tracy. I was just amazed at how similar, where you've got Dick Tracy as Mueller, and you've got rogue cards, which then say, here is this character, and this is what they do. So you have a character like Manafort and his relationship in Ukraine, and then what is his brief history, and then bring him in. Here he is as a character. Now you see the thread that he creates inside this larger tapestry, and you can trace from that rogue card, sort of from where he is and who he is, through this narrative. And it's a way to help make it make sense.
Well, I think the comic medium, Shannon, also allowed you, and again, we were arguing about this relentlessly, is, how do we bring satire to bear on this? How do we, because you could, the tweets largely speak for themselves, but yeah, how do we deal with a president who is lying about just about everything in sight, who screams fake news when there's any suggestion of a negative headline? And part of, again, I think the balance you were trying to strike with your art was we're not walking quite as fine a line as Mueller did. But Mueller is not making a partisan argument, and to be consistent with that, we're not making a partisan argument here either. Mueller chose his words very carefully. In writing this, I chose mine carefully. In drawing it, you chose the panels very carefully.
Yeah, yeah, wanting it, we have an editorial slant, but trying to keep that in check and trying to be very clear, like this is when it's moving into editorializing, and you can really distinguish so that it's not, we're not trying to slant the report, we are trying to represent it accurately, and wanting it, yeah, really trying to break it down so that you can read the graphic novel and get a really good understanding of, you know, of the 36 hours of reading you can now read in about 2 hours. And for me, like sometimes you do need to step back in order to see the forest for the trees. Like there is a tapestry. And I was thinking about the lying aspect. One of my takeaways, and it does offend me deeply, like that is the thing that really bothers me, is the lying. But where he got that from, that he's pulling from not Oliver Stone, from Roger Stone. And Roger Stone's technique was to say, deny, deny, deny. And he was very much a PR person. And where Stone got it from, go into detail about the McCarthy, if you could, a little bit, with Roy and
with Roy Cohn, yeah.
Just love that. It is such an amazing, and that's something that we could bring in and give a little bit of a context to the Mueller report and say, yeah, here's a thread that you can trace back and say, yeah, this goes back to McCarthy. And it's really an amazing bit of philosophy where you do something illegal, and to get away with it, you just never break, and you just lie about it to, you know, till you're, you know, until somebody like Mueller comes in with a hammer to say, no, you know, Stone, you need to go to jail for lying. And ideally, Trump, there will be some justice with Trump's lies, because yeah, I think it's wrong.
Well, and as you know, Shannon, Trump has spent every moment of his life, and this is how Trump became successful. And, you know, guarded by an endless platoon of lawyers, you know, he could cheat contractors on his casinos. He could come up with a bogus college. The things that he could do and get away with it. You can imagine the small wonder, the chutzpah this guy had, and small wonder the panic that he suffered when he suddenly realized how different the stakes were when you're the president, how different the stakes are when the New York Times and the Washington Post decides this is an endeavor worth pursuing. How different it is when Mueller and his investigators have the resources to spend 2 years looking at what you did. I mean, the stakes are just entirely different. And again, I mean, it was so easy for so long for him to lie so carelessly, and it was of no account, because he's a New York real estate developer, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Well, suddenly, everything he said and everything he did, again, it's why we have Mueller with the microscope on the cover, is being examined in detail. And
he's using the same technique of, let's rewrite history. Let's lie about it until the lies become the truth. And then he's pulling in allies like Barr to cover up and lie with him. And he's pulling in allies like Fox News to lie and cover up the truth. And it's a technique that has worked, and Stone used it. And, you know, going back to Roy Cohn and McCarthy. I mean, that is one aspect of what, 20, 30, maybe 6 aspects that are really addressed. But that was one that really fascinated me, was that gaslighting is how people are calling it now.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guy has an entire news network at his disposal that, you know, for the same reason, I guess everyone else is lying here, because there are profits involved. You know, they have captivated an audience by claiming that it really isn't the Mueller report we should be paying attention to, it's the Steele dossier. You know, it's like, and yeah, if it really wasn't Michael Flynn lying, it was that, you know, relationship between the FBI agents who weren't fans of Trump. You know, let's change the subject. Let's move the camera. And again, this is why you needed someone with Mueller's patience and perseverance, to keep his eye on the ball and stay focused on what Trump did.
So when you're reading through the Mueller report, and he focuses on one thing, then he focuses, like he's moving through this very methodically. What were your thoughts about, like the Trump Tower meeting is a real interesting one. How did you pull these different ideas together and say, okay, here's the piece and here's the narrative that works to explain this?
Well, I think what we both discovered, Shannon, was that some of the things that looked to be the most obvious signs of a potential conspiracy or coordination were, you know, of no importance at all. I mean, in other words, there's a June 9th meeting at Trump Tower. A couple Russians sort of send a note to Donald Trump Jr. telling him they basically have dirt on Hillary Clinton. And again, by the way, this is June of 16, so the election is still very much in play. The odds of Trump winning are, you know, pretty small at that point, but suddenly they're offering Trump dirt on Hillary Clinton. So of course they have a meeting. 4 or 5 Russians show up at Trump Tower on June 9th, and Donald Trump Jr. is there and Paul Manafort are there just to see what they have. But as it turned out, nothing really came of that whatsoever. I mean, there was, they ended up talking a little bit too much about Russian adoption to make anyone all that interested. And what I think Mueller discovered is that some of the things that look to be, you know, the headline grabbing moments of this investigation weren't all that significant. What was significant was, again, once Trump realized he was being investigated, the pressure he put on James Comey to clear him, the pressure he put on Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, to unrecuse himself and run defense for him, the pressure he put on Don McGahn, the special counsel, excuse me, not the special counsel, the White House counsel, to basically lie for him and do what he could to stop the investigation. Again, for Trump, it had nothing to do with the future of American democracy. It had nothing to do with the future of the Republican Party. It had nothing to do with the future of the presidency and how we look at it. For Trump, it was all about, as always, Donald Trump and how he was going to skate his way through this.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, it plays into the thing of what is the template that he used as for behavior? How did he approach this, and what were his priorities? And understanding character. I guess that's something that I pulled out of this as a takeaway, is understanding character, understanding Trump as character, understanding Manafort as character, understanding Cohen as character. You know, like that's something that reading it didn't emerge until like the second or third read, where it's like, oh, here are these really amazing people that are real people, Papadopoulos, and then what and how they behave and when, and to, like you said, the amazing amount of pressure, like that's when a lot of character is, and you know, the word has several meanings, but the character is revealed when you're under pressure.
Well, yeah, and I don't, Trump's character has been revealed in so many different fashions, as you know. And one of the things we also discovered, Shannon, was there are all sorts of obstructive acts that Trump does, but
Yep.
the obstructive acts he tried to do and couldn't, and asked and ordered his aides to carry out that were never done because Chris Christie didn't follow instructions, and Corey Lewandowski didn't, get that message to Jeff Sessions, and Don McGahn and Annie Donaldson basically refused to lie for the guy.
There's an irony there too, because he is saying, "Hey, I want you to protect me," and then they basically, they didn't say no, but they kind of skated it. But then them not doing that is what ends up protecting him. Because if they had done what he had instructed, it would have been criminal.
Well, yes. And, I forget exactly the context of the Churchill line about, the bodyguard of lies that, accompany all politicians. Trump had a bodyguard of liars. I mean, everyone basically was willing to lie for him. I mean, Bolton is now, going to strike it rich, I suppose, with his book, but it's not like Bolton was, putting a hand in the air and saying you can't do that. It's not,
Right.
I don't know what Kelly was doing exactly, but Manafort, Papadopoulos, all these guys basically were.
Well, their interests were self-protective. They weren't trying to protect Trump by not doing that. They knew that if they had done that, they would have been liable. They would have been committing a criminal act. And when the light gets shown on it, they would be the one that would be. They didn't want to fall.
Well, but it's worse than that. And Sarah Sanders, great example. When Comey is fired, there's a press conference. Sarah Sanders basically comes out and says she's heard from, forget how she explains it, but, so she's heard from hundreds of FBI agents delighted that Comey has been fired. And the reporters in the press room are going, wait a minute, you've heard from how many? And this is what you're hearing, because what we're hearing from sort of the run-of-the-mill FBI guys is they were pretty happy with Comey. But again, Sarah Sanders is lying like her boss, reflexively. And there are a few characters in this drama that I ended up admiring. They may not have testified in the impeachment hearings, but they did their best to, I think, to protect the presidency and protect the institution of the White House, even if that meant not following the commander-in-chief's orders here.
We're running out of time. I think we're hitting up this. We normally would have taken questions. I guess this is where we say, check out our book. We love the support, and our genuine motivation going into this was one of learning and understanding. It was not going into it with a political agenda of, hey, let's tear down a situation. It was, let's illuminate the Mueller report and make it more accessible and make it understandable through finding the highlights of it and saying, hey, this is what this really said. And we were really trying to find the truth of it and create a roadmap to the roadmap.
Yeah, and I think I once, early in the game, wrote a column arguing it was your patriotic duty to read the Mueller report. I don't know if I want to go that far, but I do think you will feel better about this country's ability to wrestle with its demons when you spend some time with our book. Again, we dedicated it to Robert Mueller because I think we admired the diligence of his work. I hope we also brought a little bit of entertainment to the subject. And again, we appreciate you listening to us today. And I really hope that you, again, spend some time with our graphic novel on the Mueller Report.
And thank you very much for tuning in to our virtual panel.